A plane vanishes in 1955 and then lands 37 years later. The world's biggest particle collider might have cracked open reality itself, and people swear things have felt off ever since. And is it possible that we're all immortal? I'll explain later. These are disturbing signs that you're already living in a parallel universe. Is it possible that we're all immortal? Not in the way that you'll never age or anything like that, but in a more like you'll never die kind of way. It's called quantum immortality, and it's one of the weirder consequences of quantum physics. Here's the basic idea. Most of us have probably heard of the theory that multiple realities form from every decision we make, every situation we find ourselves in. In quantum mechanics, there's a theory that every time something happens, the universe splits, creating a parallel universe where things went the other way. For example, let's say you're walking across the street and you nearly get hit by a bus. Close call. Well, in another reality, the bus didn't miss. In another, you were nowhere near it. In another, the bus didn't even show up. Now, you, the observer, are at the center of your own timeline. Here's where the immortality aspect comes in. If you can't observe a version of the universe where you're dead, you'll always end up in the one where you survive. That means every time you should have died, you just didn't. At least you don't experience the version where you did. From your point of view, you'll always wake up in the version of reality where you lived. Sure, other people might attend your funeral in their timelines, or the ones you used to be in, but you never actually experience death. You just keep shifting into the universe where you dodged the bullet. Now, I'm not exactly sure where old age comes into this. I mean, eventually we all do die, right? But I don't know, maybe reincarnation plays into this somehow. Look, it's totally unprovable, but it's a neat idea, and at the very least, maybe there's a version of all of our lives where we make it to 100 and pass away peacefully in bed, rather than dying in some awful accident or something. Pan Am Flight 914 is a story that keeps getting passed around because, real or not, it's an interesting story. A Pan Am Douglas DC-4 with 62 people on board took off from New York, headed to Miami on July 2nd of 1955. It vanished. Radio contact was lost, and it was presumed to have crashed. But then something weird happens, just not for another 37 years. In 1992, the same plane allegedly appeared out of nowhere on the radar of an airport in Venezuela. Air traffic control made contact, and the pilot sounded confused, saying they were en route to Miami and due to land at 9:55 a.m., as if no time had passed. The story goes there were witnesses who said the tower told the pilot where he was, which reportedly freaked him out. He supposedly panicked, restarted the engines, and took off again before anyone could stop him. The plane eventually landed in Miami shortly afterward, but authorities supposedly kept the incident quiet. Some versions of the story say the passengers were dazed, carrying outdated newspapers and IDs with no idea that they just jumped forward in time. But is this just an urban legend, or did something actually unexplainable happen that was quickly covered up? The Large Hadron Collider has been at the center of multiple wild theories ever since it switched on in 2008. Officially, it's a massive particle accelerator built by the European Organization for Nuclear Research, or CERN. It was created to smash atoms together at insane speeds in order to study the makeup of the universe. But there are plenty of people who think that something very strange happened when this thing was switched on, that a sort of Pandora's box was unleashed. One theory is that when the LHC fired up, there was this shift, that it either created a parallel universe or blended ours with another. The timing does kinda line up with when people started reporting strange phenomena on a big scale. The Mandela Effect, for example, really exploded in popularity around the same time, but people also started sharing more personal stories on internet forums about how time just didn't seem to be moving right anymore, or how reality felt off in subtle ways they couldn't quite explain. And it didn't help that in 2016, CERN released a video of what looked like a human sacrifice ritual taking place on their grounds, which they later said was a prank. And do I believe that? Yeah, first of all, I just think that's a funny idea. I love that they went there. And I also just don't think there was a genuine ritual sacrifice captured on camera here. For anyone who is already skeptical though, they were even more skeptical after this. But what do you think? Have you noticed weird shifts in your reality since 2008? I'll give you this, it is a weirder world we're living in. A woman named Pam Reynolds was brain dead for over an hour. Somehow, she came back describing things she couldn't have possibly known. In 1991, Reynolds underwent a rare procedure called a standstill operation to remove a brain aneurysm. Her body temperature was lowered significantly, her heartbeat and brain activity were completely stopped, and her eyes were taped shut. She was clinically dead, and yet, after she was revived, she gave eerily accurate descriptions of the operating room. She even described the exact surgical tools being used and recounted conversations between doctors. That's because when she was under, she claimed that she floated out of her body and saw herself laying on the table before being pulled toward a tunnel of light. She said she met dead relatives there who communicated with her without speaking, and that she needed to be convinced to return to her body, which of course she did. But what exactly happened here? How could someone with no brain function, no sensory input, describe real-time events in such clear detail? Till this day, there's never been a definitive explanation for this. Eternal Flame Falls is a small waterfall in Chestnut Ridge Park in western New York. What makes this waterfall unique is that it has a natural gas leak at its base, which allows a small flame to burn right at the base of the waterfall. The flame is constant, has been burning for as long as people have known about it, making it a fascinating and somewhat surreal sight. The fact that fire and water are so close together, one being fueled by natural gas and the other rushing down a waterfall, it definitely gives it a mysterious, almost otherworldly vibe. There's a strong connection between the flame and the idea of portals to parallel universes because the flame seems to defy natural law. The fire burning in such close proximity to water could be seen as this symbol of two opposing forces existing in the same place. Some people believe that the flame could be a sign of energy leaking from another dimension or reality, making it a potential gateway for forces from another world. But whatever your view is on all that, it is just really cool looking. The Crooked Forest has to be one of the strangest forests on planet Earth. It's famous for its trees, which grow at these odd, almost unnatural angles. Most of the trees in the forest are bent in a distinct J shape, and it's unclear exactly why they grow this way. The odd appearance of the forest has led some to wonder if there's something more going on here than just a weird quirk in nature. Some think that the crookedness of these trees could be the result of magnetic anomalies, or even something more bizarre, like a tear in the fabric of space-time. The forest is relatively small, but the strange shape of the trees gives it a haunting atmosphere. It's easy to see why people think the Crooked Forest could be a gateway to another world or dimension. Salar de Uyuni in southwestern Bolivia is the world's largest salt flat, covering more than 4,000 square miles. First glance, it looks just like this vast, barren wasteland, but it doesn't take long to realize something just feels off about it. It stretches out to the horizon, creating an optical illusion where the sky and ground almost merge together. And when the salt flat is covered with a thin layer of water, it becomes this big, giant mirror, reflecting the sky so perfectly that it can feel like you're standing in the middle of the sky. At least that's what I've heard. I've never been there myself. Certainly looks like it from images though. It's surreal, and it's inspired some to speculate about its connection to parallel universes. The mirror effect especially is often described as looking like a doorway to another dimension. The flatness and emptiness of the place also gives it an almost timeless feel, as if time just doesn't exist in the same way it does in the rest of the world. Some people who have visited this site described feeling a sense of being outside of normal reality, almost as if they were stepping into a place where the laws of physics don't apply. Mysterious region in Alaska, and it's got quite the reputation. People talk about strange things happening here, like UFO sightings and Bigfoot encounters, tons of Bigfoot encounters. But what really stands out is how many people go missing in the area. The rate of disappearances is nearly double the national average, which is pretty unsettling. Now, part of that is because it's a huge, wild, rugged place with some of the harshest weather on the planet. Even experienced explorers have to be super careful here. There are tons of reports of pilots, hikers, even whole groups disappearing without a trace. On top of that, there are stories of strange magnetic interferences in the area, compasses malfunctioning and making it nearly impossible to navigate. All of this makes the Alaskan Triangle a place full of mystery and danger. Arizona are known for being pretty dangerous, but there's a lot of eerie legends tied to the place as well, probably why it's called the Superstition Mountains. The area is full of deep canyons, steep drop-offs, rough terrain. It makes it a tough place to navigate even for experienced hikers. Over the years, more hikers have gone missing in these mountains than in any other range in the United States, about 5 a year. But it's not just the wild terrain that makes the place dangerous. The Superstition Mountains are full of legends, all of them ending in tragedy pretty much. Supposedly, there's treasure hidden somewhere here by a man who's become known as the Lost Dutchman. People have been trying to find this treasure for centuries, and many have died doing so. Probably the most gruesome part are the reports of bodies being found without heads. Sometimes the heads are found, just not anywhere close to the rest of the body. I mean, what does this cave art look like it's depicting? If you were to ask me, I'd say someone had just watched a bunch of Bob Lazar documentaries and then decided to paint some aliens onto some rocks. The thing is, these cave paintings are tens of thousands of years old. These are depictions of what are called Wanjinas by ancient tribes in Australia. These tribes, found in the Kimberley region of northwestern Australia, have culture and traditions that have been alive for at least 60,000 years, maybe even older. The Wanjinas were described as sky beings or spirits from the clouds who came down from the Milky Way during dream time. They created the earth and all its inhabitants. The legend goes that these beings spent some time on earth creating, teaching, and being gods to the Aboriginal people. Eventually, the Wanjinas disappeared. Some descended into the earth, while others returned to the sky and can be seen at night as moving lights. So, you know, by the sounds of that, maybe the alien connection isn't that far off after all. I find this super fascinating because, I mean, damn, these things really do look like your classic bulging-eyed, light-skinned gray that 90% of alien encounters are described looking like. So, did these beings really exist? Were they entities from deep in space or a parallel universe, or is this all just very coincidental? Are these ancient Indian rock paintings depicting visitors from space or another realm? One archaeologist definitely thinks so. Back in July of 2014, the State Department of Archaeology and Culture reached out to the Indian Space Research Organization for help with some ancient rock paintings found in caves near Charama in the Kankar district. Archaeologist J.R. Bhagat has been studying these rock paintings and believes they could be around 10,000 years old, which is pretty insane because some of these things look a lot like the types of sci-fi aliens we imagine today. Bhagat thinks these cave paintings depict extraterrestrials and UFOs. You've got large humanoid figures that look like they're descending from the sky, some with what look like helmets or antennae, and a disc-shaped craft with 3 rays coming from its base. It's kind of hard to look at some of these things and see anything else but aliens and UFOs, and as if it couldn't get any more uncanny, locals have told stories passed down from generation to generation about beings known as the Rohilla people, which translates to the small-sized ones. But according to these legends, the Rohilla people would come down from the sky in round flying objects and whisk away villagers who would never be seen again. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? The Abydos carvings have been a hot topic of debate for years. Found in the ancient temple of Seti I in Abydos, Egypt, among your usual hieroglyphs and carvings, there's a set of strange images that really do look like modern-day aircraft and vehicles. I mean, take a look at these things. One kind of looks like a helicopter. Some say the one on the top right there looks like a submarine. I kind of see a yacht myself. Below that, you have what looks like a jet plane or an advanced spacecraft of some kind, perhaps. It's easy to see why there are a lot of wild theories about these carvings. One of the most popular theories is that these carvings are a sign that there could have been advanced technology in ancient Egypt, possibly influenced by extraterrestrials. That aliens visited Earth thousands of years ago and shared their technology with the ancient Egyptians. So the Egyptians were just carving what they saw onto the temple walls. Again, if this really was the case, who were these beings? Were they aliens from a distant world, or were they people visiting from far in the future or a parallel universe? One of the most famous and mysterious artifacts of the ancient Maya is this sarcophagus lid right here. This is the lid of Pakal the Great's sarcophagus, found in the Temple of Inscriptions in Mexico. Pacquiao was a powerful Mayan king who ruled from 615 to 683 AD. When his tomb was discovered, the carvings on his sarcophagus lid had archaeologists pretty confused. The lid shows Pacquiao in a strange pose lying on his back, surrounded by all these intricate carvings of what really looks like complex machinery. Kind of looks like he's sitting in some kind of cockpit with his hands on controls and his feet operating pedals. Kind of looks like there's a bit of smoke also billowing out the sides. Some think it looks like he's piloting a spacecraft, or at least some sort of highly advanced piece of machinery for the time. So what was this meant to depict? Did the ancient Mayans have access to technology we have no physical knowledge of? And could this piece and others like it somehow have crossed over from another reality where there was advanced technology like this back then? Who knows? The Piri Reis map is incredibly weird. It's an old map made way back in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis. What's so mysterious about it though? Well, it shows parts of the world that shouldn't have been known about back then, like Antarctica drawn also without ice. And everything is drawn with a surprising amount of accuracy. Many historians have looked at the map, or what's left of it, which is only about a third, and most agree that it just doesn't seem like something that could have been made at the time. So there are all sorts of conspiracy theories about how Piri Reis would have made the map. Some say he had access to ancient maps from Atlantis or some other lost civilization. And you know what I'm gonna say next? Was there some help from an advanced visitor or visitors? It's impossible to say. All we can do is ponder how this guy seemed to know so much about places that wouldn't get explored fully until many centuries later. Ong's Hat was a real village in New Jersey, now abandoned. In the late 80s though, pamphlets and documents started surfacing claiming secret experiments happened there involving interdimensional travel. So a group called the Institute for Chaos Studies allegedly set up a lab in the Pine Barrens. There they built a device known as the Egg, a sensory deprivation pod meant to alter consciousness. The theory was that under the right conditions, the pod could shift someone into a parallel universe. Well, supposedly it worked. Some of the researchers vanished, remaining in some alternate version of Earth. These so-called documents circulated in zines and early internet forums. Nowadays, this is mostly seen as a hoax, and I'm sure a lot of people also saw it that way back then, but some still insist there was something strange actually going on here, that maybe at the very least, the story was some sort of cover-up for actual experiments with, fictional elements used to discredit anything and distract people from anything disturbing that was actually happening. I don't know, what do you guys think of this one? Bold Street has become a rather infamous area in Liverpool, where dozens of people have claimed to experience time slips. One story goes that a young woman named Imogen had gone shopping for some things for her sister's new baby. As she walked toward the corner of Lord Street in Whitechapel, she was excited to see a new mother care store that she hadn't noticed before. Inside, she browsed through items like baby cardigans and bibs, surprised at how cheap everything was. When she went to pay with her credit card at the front, the cashier looked confused and called the manager over. The manager turned and told Imogen that they didn't accept credit cards, only cash. Since she had none on her, Imogen left empty-handed, but when she told her mother what happened, her mom looked stunned. The mother care store had closed years ago, and the spot was now a bank, the very bank her mom used. And that's not the only weird story to come out of Bold Street. In 2006, a young man named Sean was caught shoplifting in Liverpool. While fleeing down Hanover Street, he turned into Brooks Alley, a dead end. As he caught his breath, he suddenly felt strange, like the air had thickened. He basically just waited for the security guard to follow, but no one came. Confused, Sean stepped back out into Hanover Street and instantly knew something was wrong. The street looked older. The cars were vintage. Roadworks he'd seen earlier were gone. People walked by in these outdated clothes, and there were traffic lights where there shouldn't be any. Sean pulled out his phone. There was no signal. He rushed towards Bold Street and spotted a newspaper stand. The date on the paper was May 18th, 1967. Terrified, Sean ran to a jewelry store where he pulled out his phone again, and this time it worked. Just like that, he was back in the present. Later, when he told his story to the local press, he repeated it in the exact same way every time, and while people assumed he made it up to dodge shoplifting charges, The newspaper followed up, and not only did they find his account consistent, but all the historical details he described, down to the clothes, the street layout, businesses, they were accurate for Liverpool in 1967. Even the security guard kinda backed it up. He said when he chased Sean into Brooks Alley, the kid had simply vanished. On November 9th of 1986, Spanish industrial expert Pedro Olivia Ramirez was driving from Seville to Alcalá del Guadera late at night. He knew the road well, but suddenly after a curve everything changed. The road widened into 3 massive lanes in each direction, surrounded by tall, strange buildings that he didn't recognize. On one side were huge glowing industrial buildings, on the other were these towering apartment buildings with 20 floors or so. None of it made sense, and things just got weirder from there. Pedro started to feel a wave of heat inside his car, along with strange voices, almost like a distant choir. One voice told him he'd been transported to another country or possibly another planet by extraterrestrials. And for the next couple hours he drove through this strange place, even stopping a couple times to walk along the roadside and study the odd grass and the bizarre traffic. Noticed that cars passed him every 8 minutes or so, like clockwork. Eventually, Pedro reached a road sign with directions to his home or where he was coming from. Well, he chose to retrace his steps, but he suddenly found himself parked in front of his house, and he had no memory of how he got there. He tried to retrace his path, but the wide roads, the buildings, and the strange signs were gone now. And somehow the trip, which should have only taken him about 30 minutes, had lasted over 3 hours, and he'd burned way more fuel than normal. Over the last few decades, thousands of people have vanished in national parks and forests across North America. Some of these cases are a lot stranger than others and share some eerie patterns. The person disappears suddenly, often in the middle of a group, only to be found, if they're found at all, in places that had already been searched, sometimes miles away, sometimes in impossible locations like high cliffs or extra dense parts of the woods that would be super hard to reach even with gear. And in some of these cases, the missing person reappears with zero memory of where they've been or how long they were gone. Former police officer David Paulides has been collecting these cases under what he calls Missing 411. He specifically filters out incidents with logical explanations, so that what's left are stories that truly don't make sense. In some reports, tracking dogs have refused to follow the scent or get visibly spooked. Clocks act strangely, storms roll in out of nowhere, and in a few extreme examples, the person claims they were watched or lured by something they couldn't quite explain. One theory is that these people aren't just getting lost, they're slipping through cracks in reality. In the early 80s, rumors started circulating about strange military experiments happening at Camp Hero, an old Air Force station in Montauk, New York. The story went that there was psychic testing going on, time travel, and the opening of gateways to other dimensions. A few people had come forward saying they'd been a part of it, either willingly or as kids who were abducted into the program. According to these accounts, the government was trying to weaponize the human mind. They supposedly succeeded in creating psychic soldiers who could manipulate objects, see and hear things that were going on from very distant locations, or even open dimensional rifts. There's one story where they allegedly opened a portal too wide and something came through, something not human. Supposedly, they shut the project down after that. Another account describes a time chair which let people travel into the past or future, but often came with disorienting side effects. Of course, there have never been any official documents that have confirmed any of this. It's easy to pass this off as an urban legend, but the thing is, some of the same people involved in these stories also had ties to MKUltra, which was very real and proven. So that's kind of given the Montauk Project a little more validity to some. As always though, what do you think? This next one goes back to 1943, in the middle of World War II. The story is that US Navy tried to make a ship invisible to radar at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. The ship was the USS Eldridge, but according to people who claim to have witnessed it, something much stranger happened. That's putting it lightly. Something cosmically horrific happened. They say the ship vanished completely and then reappeared hundreds of miles away in Norfolk, Virginia, and when it came back, the crew was not well. First off, there were a ton of them missing, and many who had shown back up with the ship were quite literally with the ship. it fused into the metal. The lucky ones just went insane, claiming to have seen something on the other side. The Navy has always denied that anything like this happened, but the story came to light through a man named Carl Allen, who sent letters detailing the events later. Of course, he was written off for being unstable, but the story took off anyway. There's even an X-Files episode about this one. To be fair, X-Files goes in some incredibly weird directions, so this is in no way adding validity to the story, but it does go to show just how much the Philadelphia experiment, as it came to be called, was talked about. What's interesting about this story is how specific it is, too. It doesn't really feel like your typical urban legend. It sounds more like someone trying to explain something that they don't fully understand. Who knows, maybe something strange really did happen that day. Maybe there really was an experiment that caused a breach in the fabric of reality. In the small town of Taos, New Mexico, people have been hearing a strange sound since the early 90s, a low-frequency hum, like a distant engine running, a hum that never seems to go away. Not everyone hears it, but for those who do, it's constant. Where does it come from? Well, that's the mystery. But the people who hear it report headaches, insomnia, and just overall dread, like something's just off. The government has sent scientists to investigate. They've recorded the environment, tested the soil, the air, everything, but they couldn't find what was actually causing it. The hum isn't picked up by microphones or equipment, so it's basically impossible to study. It's almost like it's happening inside the victims' bodies, which is about as terrifying as it sounds, no pun intended. Now, there are theories as to what this could be. Electromagnetic interference, underground drilling, some sort of secret military technology, but is it possible people are hearing something even stranger than that? Like an echo from another dimension? Maybe the hum isn't a sound at all, but more of a frequency from another place, something leaking in. Just a thought. Off to Scotland now, we have the Cocknose Stone. The Cocknose Stone is this huge rock in Scotland covered in all kinds of weird carvings. The stone is about 5,000 years old, and it's covered in these swirling patterns, circles, and strange symbols. One of the coolest things about this stone is that it's massive, about 42 by 26 feet, all covered in what is essentially ancient graffiti. And as for what the carvings mean, no one knows, but some archaeologists think they might be maps of the stars, or some kind of astronomical calendar of some kind. They could also be religious symbols, or there could be messages on here from something, perhaps even ancient aliens? Yeah, again, some people think aliens could have had a hand in making these carvings. Speaking of graffiti, by the way, the stone actually had to be buried in 1965 because young hooligans just wouldn't stop messing with it. Does this thing look like it's from ancient Egypt to you? I honestly thought I was looking at the steering wheel of an old tractor or something, but this object was found in 1936 in the tomb of an ancient Egyptian named Sabu. For this reason, this weird object has been referred to as the Disc of Sabu. So what the hell is it exactly? Well, your guess is as good as mine, and apparently as good as most historians or archaeologists, because they're not sure either. Of course, they can make more educated guesses than us, but the only definitive thing you can say is that this thing looks very out of place. There are strange circular structures in parts of the Middle East, often referred to as wheels. They're found in spots in Syria and Saudi Arabia. They're kind of like big stone wheels set into the desert, and they're super old, about 2,000 years or even older. And much like the famous Nazca lines, which we've talked about plenty of times on the channel, they can only be viewed from above, and nobody is exactly sure what their purpose was. The wheels weren't really noticed until the 20s when airplanes came around. From the ground, they're hard to spot. I mean, you could see that there are stones there, but you obviously don't get the full picture until you're up high looking down. So why were they made if they couldn't really be appreciated back then? Well, some people think the artists didn't make them for themselves or the people around them, but for beings they believed were looking down at them from the skies. Who were these beings? Was there religious stuff involved here, or did they have some flying friends up above? You tell me. How cool looking are these, right? Ancient depictions of monsters are always fascinating, and I mean, that has to be what these are, right? These sculptures are from ancient Iraq, way back in the Ubaid period, around 4000 BC. They look sorta human, but with undeniably lizard-like features. So are these just imaginative pieces of art, or were the sculptors capturing beings they really saw or even interacted with in real life. They have these long heads, slit-like eyes, and what look to be snouts instead of human mouths. While archaeologists think these figurines could just be symbolic or part of religious beliefs, some also think there could be more to the story. As always, what do you think? The Crucifixion of Christ painting is a famous artwork that shows Jesus nailed to the cross. And this is a scene that's been painted and drawn by artists for centuries, but in one version of this painting, one made by an unknown artist who's been lost to time, something strange seems to be lurking in the background. Take a look. So you see those flying objects in the back. What do they look like to you? In this 1350 fresco from the Visoki Dekani Monastery in Kosovo, Serbia, there are these weird flying objects in the sky. There are two people seated inside them. Now, something important to note is that this was painted long after the events depicted in the painting, so it's not like whoever made this was drawing exactly what they saw. Obviously, there's a lot of artistic license here, but it was also made long before planes were a thing. So what are these flying things supposed to be? Could there have been visitors flying through the sky at the time the artist was creating the work and he just decided to add them in? It's possible. Also very likely that these are just abstract versions of the sun and moon. This has become a rather infamous story on Reddit. Always reminds me of the Star Trek The Next Generation episode Inner Light. So this guy takes a hit to the head and blacks out. But instead of being out for a few seconds, the guy ends up living what feels like 10 full years in a completely different life. Entirely in his head, of course. In this other version of reality, he meets a woman, falls in love, settles down, starts a family. They go grocery shopping, they argue about bills, they play with their kids in the yard. He remembers what the weather was like. He remembers birthdays. I mean, we're talking real grounded stuff here. This doesn't sound like the type of wacky nonsense that goes on in dreams. It felt like real life. 10 years of it, mind you. But one day in that world, he starts noticing something strange. There's this lamp in the living room, totally normal looking, but it doesn't fit. It starts bugging him. It's like a little glitch. And the more he stares at it, the more everything else starts to feel wrong. And that's when it all starts unraveling. Suddenly he wakes up. He's lying on the ground, surrounded by people. He's back where he was right before he blacked out. Only minutes have passed. But the man is absolutely devastated. The life he just came back to doesn't feel right anymore. He remembers his wife and kids from the other world. He misses them. They weren't real though, but the emotions were. For a long time after, he struggled. He said it felt like he was mourning people who never existed. Now, was this a case of the brain doing weird things under stress? Or did he tap into something else, a different version of his life that's playing out somewhere, a parallel universe? Ken Korzak, a writer and journalist, had one of the most bizarre experiences, writing an article claiming that he'd slipped into a parallel universe. It wasn't like a whole new world, just a slightly different version of his own home and garden. He said the differences were subtle at first. His pets, specifically his cats and chickens, were behaving completely differently than he was used to. It's like they were the same animals, but something was just off about them, like seeing them through a different lens. In his words, it felt like everything in his yard was a few degrees askew. But the weirdest part came when he met this strange female entity. She wasn't human, at least not in the way you'd think. Korzak described her as resembling an elf or a fairy, and she seemed completely at home in this alternate reality. He also described feeling like she was there for a reason, like she was some kind of guide in this parallel world. He spent a lot of time reflecting on it, especially the strange, almost magical feeling of meeting this being. He genuinely believes that he had a real encounter with a parallel version of his home. As someone who's always been interested in the concept of alternate realities too, he dove deep, trying to make sense of it. Was this just a hallucination, or did he actually slip into another dimension for a brief moment? In December of 2024, Google made a pretty big announcement about their new quantum chip, Willow. This chip solved a problem in 5 minutes that would have taken even the fastest supercomputers 47 years. What was amazing here though wasn't just how fast the chip was, it's also what the head of Google's quantum AI team, Hartmut Nevins, said about it. He mentioned that this speed might be a sign that their quantum computers are pulling from multiple realities at once. Not just a throwaway comment, he was serious about this. Now, this ties in with something called the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, which states that every decision or event causes the universe to split into different versions, creating a parallel reality for each possibility. So when a quantum computer like Willow does a calculation, it's possible that it's tapping into these other universes, running all the possibilities at once, without us even realizing it. And it's not just Google talking along these lines. Other tech companies like IBM and D-Wave have been exploring quantum computing for years, and some think this technology could eventually lead us to understand or even interact with alternate realities. It's not quite science fiction anymore. Quantum computing might be the closest thing we've got to real-world proof that the multiverse could exist. This story popped up on Reddit a couple years back from a user who deleted their account shortly after posting. Here's what they wrote. I've lived in the same apartment for about 4 years. It's nothing fancy, 1 bedroom, open kitchen, small balcony, but about 2 weeks ago I came home from work and noticed something weird. The door handle felt different, like it was just slightly lower than I remembered. Same style, same lock, just off. When I walked in, everything looked normal at first, but my keys were in a different bowl than I usually leave them. I thought maybe I was just tired, but then I noticed my bookshelf. There were 2 books on it that I don't own. One of them was a collection of short stories by Ray Bradbury that I'd been meaning to buy but hadn't yet. The other was a guidebook for a city I've never been to. I asked my girlfriend if she bought them over. She said no. I called my landlord just to be sure no one had entered while I was at work. He checked. Nothing. Since then, a few other tiny things have changed. A painting in the hallway is an inch higher. My phone background changed to a photo I don't remember taking. I know how this sounds, but it feels like I came back to a version of my life that's almost the same, just not quite. Guys, I can't speak to the validity of stories like this on Reddit. If you are experiencing things like this, go to a doctor. Just, some advice. In December of 1900, 3 lighthouse keepers stationed on the remote Flannan Isles off the coast of Scotland vanished without a trace. When a relief crew arrived after a storm had delayed them, they found the lighthouse empty. Everything inside was undisturbed. Clocks had stopped, meals were left on the table, and one of the men's coats was still hanging on a hook. The only clue was a logbook entry mentioning a violent storm, but the weather had actually been pretty calm the day they supposedly wrote it. No bodies were ever found. The official explanation is that a massive wave may have swept them out to sea, but that doesn't add up. Why were there no signs of struggle? No debris, nothing washed up. It was like they just stepped off the island and vanished. For decades, amateur astronomers and conspiracy theorists have pointed to something strange orbiting Earth, an unidentified object known as the Black Knight satellite. The story really kicked off in the 50s when both the US and Soviet Union detected something unusual in orbit. It wasn't one of theirs. It didn't match the movement of any known satellites at the time. And then there's the really weird part. In the 70s, images taken during a NASA mission seemed to show this strange, jagged object in orbit, and it didn't look like space junk or any known satellite. Some believe it's been up there for 13,000 years, sent by an ancient civilization or aliens as a monitoring device. Nikola Tesla himself claimed to have received a repeating signal from space in the 1890s, and some now connect that to this. No one knows exactly what it is. NASA says the object in the photos is just a thermal blanket that came loose during a mission, but that explanation doesn't sit well with people who've followed the story for decades. If it really is something watching us from above, then who or what put it there, and how long have they been watching? We haven't done a comment shout out for a while, so considering you guys left us some pretty interesting comments on part 1 of this video, I figured I'd read one out. From Dangleberry Snoot comes this comment. A person I knew died in 2018 and I attended her funeral. 3 years later, I was in a terrible car crash and came out without injury. Emergency service workers couldn't believe I walked away. Later that year, I received a message on Facebook that my friend in 2018, who died, had somehow just died, and I attended her funeral for a second time. something very odd is occurring in this world. Cameron Park in Waco, Texas is known for being one of the creepiest forests in the state. It's got this mix of eerie legends and paranormal activity that gives it a real dark fairy tale kind of vibe. There's remnants of an old abandoned castle here, for example, said to have once been home to a witch. The story goes that an old hag used to live there, practicing dark magic and luring youngsters in to poison them. When the locals found out, they formed a mob and burned her house to the ground. Now her vengeful spirit is said to haunt the ruins, chasing away anyone who dares to get too close. Some say you can even hear the screams of her victims echoing through the forest at night. Another infamous part of the park is referred to as Jacob's Ladder, a massive steep set of stairs that leads through the forest. It's a tough climb, but once you make it to the top, you get some amazing views. The stairs, though, are said to be haunted by a malevolent spirit, said to grab at people's clothes and sometimes pull them down hard enough to tumble down the stairs to their death. It's a massive flat-top mountain sitting right where the borders of Venezuela, Brazil, and Guyana meet. It's part of a region known as the Tepuy, which is a collection of isolated flat-topped mountains that just don't look real, at least not like something you'd see here on Earth. Roraima itself is especially fascinating because it rises more than 9,000 feet above the surrounding jungle, and its sheer cliffs make it nearly impossible to climb from the sides. The top of the mountain is covered in mist most of the time, giving it this eerie, almost otherworldly look. As for what's on top, it's almost like an entirely different world. There are these unique species of plants and animals that don't exist anywhere else, and the area has a strange, almost magical feel to it. The isolated environment has led to all kinds of theories about it being a possible doorway to another universe. Some believe that the mountain could be some sort of portal, where the separation from the rest of the world creates a gateway to a parallel reality. Local indigenous tribes have their own legends about the mountain being a place where the gods live, and many have stories of strange events happening around it. Some explorers even report hearing strange noises while they're there. The Devil's Sea, or the Dragon's Triangle, is an area off the coast of Japan, south of Tokyo. It's often compared to the Bermuda Triangle, which is not a good thing. For decades, it's had a reputation for unexplained disappearances, strange weather patterns, and reports of unusual lights in the sky. One of the most famous stories here is the disappearance of the Japanese military vessel Kaio Maru No. 5 in the 50s. The ship, which was conducting research in the area, vanished without a trace, and no wreckage was ever found. There have been other reports of unexplained events too, including ships being found in the wrong locations, crew members mysteriously vanishing, and bizarre compass malfunctions. There's this idea that the Devil's Sea could be a place where time and space don't quite behave the way they should. The idea of a parallel universe or some sort of dimensional rift gets tossed around a lot when people discuss the area. Wycliffe Well is a tiny settlement in the Barkly region of the Northern Territory in Australia. It's about 380 miles north of Alice Springs, and it's known for one thing above all else: UFO sightings. The area only has a handful of permanent residents, but it's become pretty well known as a hotspot for strange activity. People from all over the world come here to visit the Wycliffe Well UFO Center, which displays local reports and stories of alien encounters. For decades, locals and visitors have reported seeing bright lights in the sky, strange flying objects, and mysterious unexplained events happening around the area. The town even calls itself the UFO capital of Australia, and there are signs along the road warning visitors of frequent UFO sightings. But why here? Why this tiny section of Australia? Some believe that there could be some sort of wormhole here, connecting the place to some distant part of space, or maybe even another dimension, with the UFOs acting as the vehicles that travel through them. Wycliffe Well is in the middle of nowhere, too, surrounded by vast desert. The isolation gives the place a certain eerie quality that makes it feel like a place where aliens could roam around undetected. Pyramid Lake in Nevada is a beautiful but eerie spot with a dark history. It's known for its dangerous reputation, and there are all sorts of legends tied to it. The most chilling of these comes from the local Paiute tribe, who speak of the water babies, angry spirits that pull people into the lake, and not for a swim, they kill them. The spirits are said to make these horrid crying and laughing sounds that echo off the lake in the late hours of the night. Over the years, many people have drowned in the lake, and because it's so deep, many of their bodies have never been found. But what's extra strange is the phenomenon of people disappearing in the lake only only for their bodies to turn up miles away in Lake Tahoe, about 61 miles away. Hard not to wonder if there's something otherworldly going on in these waters. So it's a sweltering day in July of 1954 at Tokyo's Haneda Airport. A man arrives on an international flight and walks up to customs. Everything seems routine. He looks European, speaks multiple languages, and has a legit-looking passport, from a distance that is. Looking at it up close, turns out this passport says he's from a country called Torrid. Never heard of it? Neither had the Japanese officials. They ask him to point it out on a map, and without hesitation he points to the area around where Andorra is, between France and Spain. But he's confused. He insists Torrid has been a country for over 1,000 years. The customs officers are confused, to say the least. Is this a joke? Is the guy just out of his mind? The guy seems just as confused as they are. His passport has stamps from other countries, including past visits to Japan, and he has multiple currencies in his wallet. He even mentions a business trip and says he's got meetings set up with a company in Tokyo. But when the officials call the company, they say they've never heard of him. Same story with the hotel that he claimed to have booked. At this point, they're really not sure what to do with him, so they put him up in a hotel room under guard for the night while they try to figure things out. But by the next morning, he's gone. The room was locked from the outside. There was no way out. At least none that the guards wouldn't have been able to see. To this day, no one knows who he was or where he came from, really. Some think he slipped into our world from another reality and then slipped right back out. Others think this whole story is just a good old-fashioned urban legend, but if we seriously consider the possibility that the multiverse really is a thing, well then this story starts to sound a little less outlandish. The Marcahuasi Stone Forest in Peru is one of those places that seems to have a ton of weird stuff happening. People have been talking about strange occurrences there for years, mostly because the place is filled with these huge stone structures that look like they belong to some ancient civilization. But there are also some strange stories surrounding this place. Well, one goes that a group of hikers got a lot more than they bargained for when they camped here. While hanging out, they started to hear some music coming from what seemed like a cabin in the middle of nowhere. It sounded like a celebration. The group looked around and sure enough, they spotted a stone cabin lit up from the inside, and they could see people dancing through the windows. The people were dressed like they were from the 1600s, all in old-fashioned clothes. Naturally, one of the hikers decided to check things out. She got closer to the cabin, and the closer she got, the stranger things became. Her friend noticed that she was acting off, like her body was stiff and she wasn't walking right. Got even weirder when she suddenly couldn't move her arm, like she was partially paralyzed. They managed to pull her away from the cabin, and she snapped out of it right away. People who know the area say the Marcahuasi might be some kind of doorway between dimensions or timelines. The idea is that certain spots on Earth might have thin barriers to other worlds, and that cabin could have been a glimpse into some different time. This story comes from a Reddit user named Albert Norman 2069, who shared an experience that left him questioning everything about the world. It had all started on June 28, 2014, a day that seemed normal at first. He'd woken up, brushed his teeth, ate breakfast, and headed out to work. But as he turned on the car radio, something wasn't right. Instead of the usual music, the station was airing a talk show. The host was excitedly talking about something called Victory in the Great War, and praising the troops for their role in this victory. At first, the Redditor thought maybe it was some kind of special segment, but the more the host went on, the stranger things got. There was talk of a victory in Italy, and something about the Second Great Depression finally coming to an end. He was confused, but he ended up brushing things off. It was probably just fictional. But then things started getting even stranger when he was at work. During lunch, he overheard his coworkers talking about the same victory in Italy, and they kept mentioning the numbers 33 to 13. When he asked what they were talking about, they acted like he was the odd one for not knowing. And when he asked about a coworker named Sam, who didn't seem to be there, no one seemed to remember it. At least something was very off. On his way home, he decided to take a different route to avoid traffic, and that's when he noticed that the city looked worse than he remembered. Buildings were crumbling, some were abandoned, and there were banners everywhere again celebrating this mysterious victory. When he finally got home, he flicked on the news. The anchors were talking about the victory in Italy and how the US was dealing with a war abroad. Europe was also in chaos, and the US was in an even worse depression than the 1930s. Of course, things went back to normal by the next day. So was it just a really vivid dream? Well, possibly. But perhaps Albert Norman 2069 really did spend a day in a much darker version of our own reality. Next up are some pretty strange cave paintings, the Wanjinas, some of the most mysterious and downright eerie cave art on Earth. These ancient paintings are found in the Kimberley region of northwestern Australia, painted by Aboriginal tribes whose culture has been going strong for over 60,000 years. The Wanjinas, according to legend, were sky beings, spirits from the clouds who came down during dream time, said to be this time when the Earth was still being formed. These beings supposedly created the land, animals, people, everything. They taught the Aboriginals how to live, and then they vanished. Some say they returned to the stars, others say they went underground. But, I mean, just look at these cave paintings, the big black eyes, the pale skin, they look like aliens. But this art is estimated to be tens of thousands of years old, long before anyone was talking about aliens, at least not in the modern sense. Kinda makes you wonder, are the Wanjinas more than just myth? Did these ancient tribes actually encounter something from beyond the stars? Or maybe even from a parallel reality? This final story comes from Reddit user GoodResolve33 and goes as follows. When I was younger, my cousins and I would play in my aunt's basement during major holiday parties. Parents would be upstairs and we would all just hang out and mess around in the basement, entertaining ourselves with whatever junk was down there. Well, there was a metal door down there with a bolt lock that we never touched. But one day, we unlocked the door and we saw a major boxing event going on. I'm talking Jumbotron, bright lights, arena, and a major crowd. Everything seemed to freeze when we opened the door though. People in the crowd turned around to look at us. Fighters stopped fighting, the referee signaled us out, and we saw shadows in the crowd running toward us. It all sounds crazy, but I remember how scared we were. We shut the door, ran upstairs, and sat in the living room with our parents. I remember them being like, "What's going on with these guys?" As we sat in the living room silent, crapping ourselves because we thought we were going to get in trouble. Fast forward to much later, I tried to tell my parents, and they swear that I imagined it. I thought I did too for the longest time, until randomly, one of my cousins from that day hit me up after so long of not communicating, only to bring up that same event, detail for detail as I described and remembered it. I go back to that house to check out the door. Across the door is the neighbor's basement door, since it was a duplex, and stairs leading up the metal basement doors that come out to the backyard. Not sure what the F that was, and I promise you I'm not that crazy. I get goosebumps thinking about the situation sometimes because it makes absolutely zero sense.
Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot we have the Bermuda Triangle. The Bermuda Triangle is the mecca when it comes to mysterious disappearances and rumors and urban legends, so of course it had to make it onto this list. The triangle, which sits in between Florida, Puerto Rico, and Bermuda, earned its deadly reputation starting back in the 1970s. Since then, there has been about 80 aircrafts and 60 boats that have gone missing in the triangle, which only fueled rumors that there was some sort of force or supernatural cause that was making this area one where people would often go missing. There have been intense electrical forces and tunnel-like clouds reported in the triangle, which some believe is the cause for the disappearances. Some others believe it's weather patterns, some believe it's the entrance to a parallel universe or a place where aliens like to abduct their victims, and some people like to dismiss the idea that there's any sort of mystery at all. At this point, exactly what is going on with the Bermuda Triangle remains a mystery. In our number 9 spot today we have the Oregon Vortex. Just off of Interstate 5 in southern Oregon lies what is called the Oregon Vortex. According to local legend, it is said that this area and the strange and mysterious stories surrounding it aren't just modern legends, but that perhaps it stems back further. People have said that the stories of the Oregon Vortex actually stem back to when Indigenous Americans referred to it as the Forbidden Land. It is said that during these times, people traveling on horses would often find that their horses would be refusing to go into the area, so clearly something strange was going on in there that was spooking the animals. Scientists have speculated that the land might contain some kind of crossed magnetic lines that produce some sort of force field, but whatever it really is, the place is truly strange. Things appear very differently here. It's sort of like an optical illusion. The area is basically a parallel universe in itself. In our number 8 spot today we have the Challenger Deep. The Challenger Deep is the deepest known point in our ocean, around 10,900 meters deep. It is located in the Pacific Ocean in the southern part of the Mariana Trench, and because of its location, lack of light, and immense pressure, it hasn't been explored very much. The extreme environment has certainly set up for there to be a whole host of species that we know absolutely nothing about, about, but it is not an area that can be easily explored by humans. The Challenger Deep has only been visited 4 times and only for short periods of time, so there is so much more that is waiting to be uncovered at this deep, dark part of our ocean, and I don't know about you, but I feel like there are insane amounts of ocean creatures that could fully be aliens. They are so strange and interesting and unique, so who in the world knows what really lurks down there. In our number 7 spot today, we have Point Nemo. I'm sure there's a few of us out there who dream of time alone, away from other people, and Point Nemo is exactly that. It's like a parallel universe where if you were to visit, you'd feel like you were the only person on Earth. This is the most remote location on Earth. It's officially known as the oceanic hole of inaccessibility because it is the furthest point away from land. This area is surrounded by more than 1,000 miles of ocean in every direction. There are obviously no humans who live even close to Point Nemo, which is why it is called that in the first place, Nemo being Latin for no one. This location is so isolated that the closest people to Nemo aren't even on this Earth. Since the inhabited areas closest to the point is over 1,000 miles away, the humans aboard the ISS are way closer than anyone on land. Truly just wild. Kind of sounds like a dream, kind of sounds like a nightmare. In our number 6 spot today, we have Kawah Ijen. Located in Indonesia, this is one of the most remarkable and interesting places on Earth. Firstly, this active volcano emits hot, flammable, sulfurous gases. These gases ignite as they enter the oxygen-rich atmosphere of Earth, and this causes them to burn with a stunning blue flame. Further scientific processes also allows for there to be a flow of molten sulfur that also has that same striking blue flame. At night is really when you get quite a show from this coloring, as it quite literally looks like a flow of blue lava. The other incredible thing about this location is that there is a 1-kilometer wide caldera that is filled with turquoise blue water. The watercolor, while it looks gorgeous, is a result of extreme acidity as well as a high concentration of dissolved metals. It is an astonishing place to look at and really is quite magnificent.
The following story comes to us from Wolfie is Back in Black, who was in high school when this happened, living in the same neighborhood she lives in now in Mumbai. The area hadn't undergone much development back then, with dense vegetation covering what is now occupied by buildings. The Redditor was very familiar with the area, having spent her teenage years exploring its nooks and crannies with her then boyfriend. One day, they were lost in conversation and wandered towards the end of the road. Without paying attention, they turned right and accidentally walked into the last building on the lane, and what they found was very strange. In total contrast to the well-maintained surroundings, this particular building was dilapidated, like it had been bombed and set on fire. It had an eerie silence about it, devoid of the usual signs of life. No birds, no insects, nothing. There was moss growing in places and chunks of concrete had fallen off. They'd even seen the building. They had never seen the building before and hastily left, joking about the place looking like a haunted apartment. Well, 2 weeks later, she found herself in the same lane with her cousin, and lo and behold, that dystopian-looking building had completely transformed. It was painted in vibrant colors, flowers bloomed in pots, and there was vegetation surrounding it that would have taken months to grow. She approached a guard who was stationed nearby and asked him if the building had been recently renovated, and he looked at her like she was crazy and just said, no. From Reddit user Star884, we have the blue truck. The story goes as follows. My mother and I were on our way to a funeral. We stopped by the corner gas station to grab drinks on the way. I was in the passenger seat, my mom was driving. She turns around, not moving, but the car is in gear, to where I thought she was backing out of the spot. I always look in the mirrors when anyone is reversing, just a natural habit. So thinking she's backing out, I was like, whoa, wait, there's someone coming. I saw a pretty big light blue truck coming very fast behind us. My mom says, cool, I see it, and stops. All of a sudden, there is another car coming pretty fast on the complete opposite side. The freaking blue truck disappeared though, just gone. It had nowhere to go. We were all literally about to crash all 3 cars. Somehow, it was gone. So my mom and I both saw the big light blue truck coming. We either had something happen or we had a shared delusion. And finally, we have a strange story from Reddit user London Mama 2019 who had a very strange experience in a graveyard. Probably the last place you'd want to have a strange experience in. I had taken my 6-year-old for a walk to the playground. We just moved houses, so didn't know the area well. So I checked my Apple Maps to see if there was a quicker way home, as my little one was starting to complain a bit. The quickest way was through a graveyard. We started walking and the birds were singing. It was quite sunny, perfectly normal. As we walked further though, the atmosphere just changed. It's really hard to explain, but it felt completely flat. No birds, no people, just a really oppressive feeling. We also noticed that some things looked not quite right, like gravestones facing in different directions. I'd never seen this before and it was bizarre. Some were in rows, some sideways, some facing the opposite direction, and there was a huge pile of dirt against the side of the little church. I didn't want to scare my daughter, so kept chatting. Then she seemed to notice it too and said, "This is horrible, I don't like it here." I checked my map and it had gone crazy. It was directing us the opposite way and kept changing and moving around. I followed the path round, and as the main street came into view, everything seemed to go back to normal. Birds, people, traffic sounds, even the sun seemed to get brighter. When we got home, we talked about it. I told my husband, my daughter called it the creepy graveyard. The following week we went back to show my husband, but it was like a different place, no weird vibes at all. It was very peaceful but completely normal, and we couldn't find the gravestones facing different ways. I read a book last week about time slips, and the way it felt was described by a few people who had experienced time slips. So now I'm wondering if this could be what happened to us. Our first story comes to us from Reddit user SadBlackCat666, who tells of the time they were introduced to their deceased great aunt. My maternal grandfather's sister passed away from cardiac issues in 2000. I was born in 2003 and was told for years growing up that this is your aunt, we'll just call her Laura here. She died from heart issues. I was able to understand the concept of death, dying from a very young age. So I understood that she passed away and that I would never meet her. Fast forward to 2014 or 15, I'm at a family function and my mom introduces me to my aunt. She explained to me, "This is your Aunt Laura." I was shocked and told them both that I thought she died before I was born. She looked exactly like the woman in the pictures I was shown as a kid, so I knew it was her. They were both confused. After a bit of talking, I went back to hanging out with my cousins. However, the whole thing still spooked me for years to come. When I was 18, I asked my mom if she remembered this incident. She had no clue what I was talking about and still has no clue. She just doesn't remember a damn thing about what happened. I'm in my early 20s now and I'm still confused about the whole ordeal. I sometimes wonder if I slipped into a parallel universe where my great aunt was still alive in the mid-2010s. Striped Macaron posted about her incredibly harrowing near-death experience on Reddit. She'd been 25 years old at the time, driving home from work one night in Los Angeles on a curvy section of road on Sunset Boulevard. Suddenly a car spun out of control in front of her, blocking her lane with no time to halt. With another car beside her, options were limited. She instinctively swerved right then left to avoid collision. Then she felt a surreal flashback to a trip she'd taken with her mother to Disney World. She'd only remembered vague parts of the trip, but this particular memory wasn't one of them. This is when she was convinced her life was flashing before her eyes and that she was going to die. She screamed, no, this isn't fair, not yet," as she swerved all over Sunset Boulevard. But then she just stopped and suddenly found herself alone on the road, as if everything had been wiped clean. She drove back home and didn't see a single car the entire way. Sunset Boulevard on a Saturday night was eerily deserted. She reached home and parked the car, still no one in sight. Once inside, she called a friend asking her to confirm that she really was alive, just to ground herself back into reality. She was convinced she might be in a limbo state after death. She finishes by saying, "There was no way mathematically to escape it. There was nowhere for the car on the right to go. This moment has haunted me my whole life. There have been times when I have questioned my own existence. I've wondered if my life since has been a very detailed death trip and I'm actually lying on Sunset Boulevard." The next story comes from Reddit user Cold Old Duck. "I was picking up my mom and driving towards the same intersection I always went through. Lights were green. All of a sudden in my head, I felt and heard a split second of pure dread. Someone running the red and hitting me broadside right in the driver's side door. I could feel the crash, being crushed, the pain, the blackness, and it was instantly gone, just left with the dread and terror. I braked hard hard and slowed to an almost crawl stop at the intersection despite the green light, and a car came flying through the red at high speed a second or two later. Never knew why or how I knew, but it was terrifying. I felt like a cat who had escaped with one life less. Reddit user MaterialWolf8005 brings us this next story entitled, "I died and woke up in a parallel universe." I have sleep apnea, and sometimes if I sleep facing up, I will wake up gasping for air and choking on my saliva. Anyway, I was so tired I slept facing up. I remember waking up freaking out and gasping for air. As I looked to the ceiling, my vision started going black from all angles into a single point. Think of how an old TV turns off. After that, I was staring at myself through a mirror I have facing my bed. I remember thinking, oh no, I'm dead, as I looked at myself lying down. Then I saw myself moving as if I was waking up. I woke up. But the craziest part is that as soon as I woke up, I saw myself in the mirror staring at me, but standing up, not laying down. Now this world feels off. I was anxious and depressed, and all of a sudden, I'm fine. I feel like I died in a parallel universe and woke up in this one. It's so weird. I can't explain it, but I feel different. This next story is pretty trippy. It comes from Peyton Lay 0616, who seemed to have watched a monster truck completely vanish right in front of their house. They write, "This happened not too long ago. I was standing on my porch watching my kids play in the front yard. Our street has a crossroad intersection at the end, and I could see it from where I was. As I was watching my two kids, I noticed a big black truck, the kind that has floodlights at the top and bars in front of the grill, pulling up to the intersection from the left road. I saw a bald man driving and two other guys in the bed of the truck, and on the sides were two different flags. One looked like a French flag, I believe, and the other I had never seen before. They looked like they were celebrating, and I remember wondering if maybe their team had won a soccer game or something, because it looked like they were being loud. But the thing was absolutely silent, and I could see them whooping and hollering and chanting. Anyway, they turned down my street, coming towards me. I kept my eyes on them because they were intriguing me. I watched them turn down my street, start coming my way. Now, here's the tricky part. My neighbor had a big SUV in their driveway that blocked off my vision from part of the road, and once that truck, those two flags, and three celebrating men reached the part of the road obstructed by my view of the SUV, they never came back out. I even walked down into my yard to see if maybe they'd pulled into the grass of another neighboring house, but nothing. They just vanished behind the neighbor's car. Always awkward running into someone who recognizes you and you just can't remember their name, or worse, can't remember them at all. This story from Open Temperature 6440 kind of takes that to a different level. It goes as follows. This happened back in 2014. I went to Walgreens a few blocks from my house at night to buy a few items. While I was there, this guy down the aisle from me started talking to me like he knew me, but I didn't know him. Never seen him before in my life. He asked me how things are going and asked if I was still working for Joe. Joe was the name of my boss that I worked for a while when I was in college. I told him no, I wasn't still working for Joe because I'd graduated and gotten a full-time job. I was so confused and asked how he knew me. He seemed surprised that I didn't remember him and said that he was Joe's son, which is weird because the Joe I worked for didn't have a son, just two daughters. He could tell I was confused and asked if I was okay, and I replied that I was fine, but I didn't remember him. He was still shocked that I didn't know him. Eventually, the conversation ended, and I went on my way. A few months later, I ran into my old boss, Joe, and I told him I ran into someone that said he was his son, and asked just to make sure he didn't have a son. He said, nope. Not that I know of. I still don't know what to make of that encounter, but it was bizarre to say the least. My theory is that I somehow entered an alternate universe or reality, but I don't know. Maybe I dreamed the whole thing. Who knows? The following is a story from DSLY4425, who writes about a possible glitch in the Matrix. I remember writing a term paper in college about a specific disease and disease process that still exists to this day, and the treatment at the time, specifically that at the time there was no medication available on the market to treat it, although there was a lot of research being done. Fast forward 15 years, and I was debating with my pharmacist, who was also my boss, how long a medication for said disease was on the market. And we got curious and looked it up. In this dimension, the medication has been on market since the late 90s, which would have been high school for me. I definitely wouldn't have written my paper on the subject or gotten a high score on it, for that matter, if the medication really was on the market in the late 90s, as the paper was written in 2003 at the earliest. And I wrote the paper on that specific disease and process as I was working with patients directly impacted by it at the time, and had taken a good deal of extra training in my field of work, specifically with those patients, so I kinda knew my stuff and where research was heading, which at the time was developing the drugs that are now on the market, but none were out.
In our number 5 spot today, we have the Devil's Kettle. This area is said to hold one of Minnesota's greatest mysteries. As the Brule River flows through in order to make its way toward Lake Superior, there is a point where it makes an 800-foot drop in 8 miles. Because of this journey through time, waterfalls have been created as the water erodes the rocky terrain. One waterfall in particular is the one that we want to talk about today. The stream splits into two as it falls over the edge. One of the two streams flows exactly how you would think it does, while the other is a little more mysterious. On this side, the water rushes into a cavern that seems to go nowhere. The cavern never fills up somehow, but no one can figure out where the water is going. It's a strange phenomena that has resulted in the fall gaining the nickname the Devil's Kettle. It is said that people have tried to place things in the water that might help show them where the water is flowing to, but despite these efforts, the items were just never seen again. In our number 4 spot today, we have the Pyramids of Giza. One of the most mysterious places on Earth has to be the Pyramids of Giza. I mean, how? For centuries, people have wondered and tried to find answers as to how they were built at all, let alone with limited resources and without the use of modern technology. And they've been around for the last 4,000 years, so the durability alone is outstanding. This alone is the source of much mystery, but that's only the outside of them. What lies on the inside might just be even more so. The Pyramids of Giza, especially the Great Pyramid of Giza, were believed to have been built as tombs for rulers and other wealthy people. That totally makes sense, except for the fact that there hasn't been any mummies found inside of them. Instead, there is just a plethora of secret, unexplored rooms, hidden doors and mirrors, you know, just regular ancient Egypt stuff. Many of these secret rooms remain completely unexplored over fear of damage. One more strange thing about these incredible creations, before we move on though, they were built on the center of the Earth. However they did this, they aligned them perfectly with Orion's belt, with no technology, just pure brilliance. I'm just saying, if anywhere is going to take you to a parallel universe, these pyramids will take you back in time to a completely different world. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Crooked Forest. Forests are already creepy. This one looks like it's straight out of a Tim Burton film. The Crooked Forest in Poland. There's around 400 odd-shaped pine trees near the town Gryfino. These trees are about 90 years old, and all of them, from the base, they immediately bend towards the north and then slowly curve back towards the sky like the other trees. Despite the odd bend, these trees are otherwise healthy. There's been so many theories, but none of them really stick. Some suggest it was a gravitational anomaly, but that's a little too far-fetched for me. I don't know. This isn't Interstellar, right? Other theories claim that there were heavy snowfalls that would weigh down the branches, which could check out, but why is it just a select amount? I've also lived in Canada my entire life. We have lots of snow, and I've never seen a Sleepy Hollow tree before. My favorite theory is that farmers were trying to make the tree curved on purpose to make stronger wheels, because the grain direction would make for naturally curved wheels. Again though, nobody knows for sure. What are your thoughts? Do we like the wheel theory? I'm just gonna keep a spare tree tire just in case. Keep it stored safely in the trunk. Okay, jokes. I'm funny. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Catatumbo River. Basically, in western Venezuela, right over the Catatumbo River, there are these insane, intense lightning storms, and it's a complete atmospheric phenomenon. This lightning occurs 140 to 160 nights a year, 9 hours per day, and from 16 to 40 times per minute. That is absolutely insane. That is so much lightning. Another thing that's so fascinating about this lightning is that it is colorful, and it doesn't produce any thunder. The lightning does change its frequency up from time to time, and at one point it stopped for a few weeks, weeks, and people thought that maybe it was going to have been exhausted forever, but that changed when the lightning came back, putting it right back on our list of mysteries that we just can't quite figure out. Many people have studied the lightning, trying to figure out how exactly it has been created and what makes this phenomena what it is, but we just aren't quite sure yet. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the reverse waterfall. This mysterious and strange location is another one that comes from India. Here there is a waterfall, but it's got a catch. While we all of course expect to see water cascading down when we think of a waterfall, this strange location instead sees the water moving towards the sky. Some people believe it's because of some anti-gravitational force, others think it's due to the heavy air pressure, and I'm not a scientist, so I'll let you decide. While this is certainly quite a strange place, it also definitely delivers when it comes to beauty. I think even if the water flowed down like a normal waterfall, this area would still see a lot of tourists just because of the immense natural beauty.